Welcome to a story of resilience and redemption. We hope you're having a great day. Let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another powerful and heartfelt story. Chapter 1. The Last Bid. The auction hall was packed, filled with the scent of sawdust and sweat, and humming with low conversations. Beneath the bright lights, horses were paraded one by one, their muscular forms gleaming under the scrutiny of buyers. Ranch owners and trainers watched with sharp, calculating eyes, seeking their next prized champion. In the midst of the grandeur, a frail-looking stallion was led into the ring. His once glistening coat was dull, marred with scars and patches of missing fur. His ribs jutted out, a silent testimony to years of neglect. Instead of standing tall and proud, the animal barely lifted his head. The auctioneer cleared his throat and tried to inject enthusiasm into his voice. Next up, a fine stallion, Chestnut, 5 years old. Who will start the bidding? His voice echoed through the hall. But instead of excitement, murmurs of disinterest rippled through the crowd. That one's done for, a man in a cowboy hat muttered. Not worth the price of his feed. Laughter followed. A woman in expensive riding boots scoffed, shaking her head. No spirit left in him. Looks like he's already given up on life. The auctioneer's smile faltered, his words now edged with desperation. Do I hear 200? 100? Come on now, folks. Every horse has value. But the bidders turned away. Nobody wanted a horse that had nothing left to give. Then, from the back of the room, a chair scraped against the wooden floor. Heads turned as a young man in worn-out jeans and a faded plaid shirt stood up. His face was calm, unreadable, but his eyes were locked onto the defeated stallion in the ring. I'll take him. His voice was steady, though not loud. A ripple of shock ran through the room. You serious, kid? Someone sneered. You gonna throw money away on that? The young man ignored the remarks. How much? The auctioneer blinked, caught off guard, then quickly regained his composure. Well, since no one else is bidding, $50. Final call. With a nod, the young man stepped forward, pulling a few crumpled bills from his pocket. The auctioneer banged his gavel. Sold to the young man in the back. As the whispers of disbelief grew, the young man made his way toward the ring. The stallion flinched as he approached, his large, frightened eyes scanning his new owner. The young man crouched beside him, lowering his voice to something only the horse could hear. You're not broken, he murmured, his voice filled with quiet conviction. You're just waiting for someone to believe in you again. The stallion's ears twitched slightly. For the first time in a long time, someone saw more than just a beaten-down animal. They saw hope. Chapter 2. A Fragile Trust. The night air was cool as Ethan led the stallion, whom he had silently named Phoenix, out of the auction grounds. His truck and trailer sat under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. The only thing standing between this horse and whatever cruel fate he had narrowly escaped. Phoenix hesitated, his hooves digging into the dirt. He wasn't sure whether to trust the man holding his lead rope. Ethan didn't rush him. Instead, he loosened his grip, letting Phoenix take his time. Easy, boy, he murmured. No one's gonna hurt you. The stallion's ears flicked back, his dark eyes unreadable. He had heard promises before. It took several long minutes. But eventually, Phoenix took the first step, then another. With patience and gentle reassurance, Ethan guided him into the trailer. The moment the ramp was secured, Phoenix let out a deep, exhausted sigh and sank onto his knees, too tired to stand any longer. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. This horse had given up. The drive home was quiet, except for the occasional thud of Phoenix shifting inside the trailer. Ethan kept glancing in his rearview mirror, half expecting the stallion to panic. But he never did. When they reached his small ranch on the outskirts of town, Ethan parked and climbed out. The place wasn't much, just a couple of fenced pastures, a small barn, and a house that had seen better days. But it was home. Ethan opened the trailer and stepped inside. Come on, buddy, he coaxed. Let's get you settled. Phoenix lifted his head but made no move to stand. He was utterly drained. Ethan sighed and took a seat inside the trailer, just a few feet away. He didn't touch the horse, didn't pressure him, just let him be. The quiet between them stretched into the night, and little by little, Phoenix's breathing slowed. Eventually, Ethan stood and backed away, giving Phoenix space. "Take your time," he said softly before stepping out of the trailer. It wasn't until an hour later that Phoenix finally gathered the strength to stand and step down onto solid ground. For days, Ethan let Phoenix set the pace. He didn't rush him, didn't force anything. Each morning, he sat by the stall, reading out loud from an old book, his voice calm and steady. Sometimes, Phoenix ignored him. Other times, his ears twitched at the sound. Ethan took it as a win. He didn't try to touch him, but every day, he left fresh hay, clean water, and a few apple slices just outside the stall. At first, Phoenix wouldn't touch them while Ethan was around. But one evening, as Ethan pretended not to look, he saw the stallion lower his head and take a cautious bite. Progress. But trust is fragile, and it only takes one mistake to break it. It was a week before Ethan tried to lead Phoenix out to the pasture. He approached the stall calmly, rope in hand, his voice gentle. "Let's go outside for a bit." "Huh? Sun's nice today." Phoenix watched him, tense but curious. Ethan moved slowly, lifting the halter. "Just gonna slip this on. Okay?" But the moment the strap brushed Phoenix's face, the stallion exploded. Rearing back, he let out a panicked cry, his eyes wide with terror. His hooves lashed out, striking the wooden walls of the stall with a deafening crack. Dust swirled in the air as Ethan stumbled back, hands raised. "Easy, easy," he said quickly. "You're safe." But Phoenix wasn't listening. He was somewhere else, trapped in whatever nightmare the past had left behind. Ethan's heart pounded as he backed away. Lowering the rope, he had pushed too soon. Phoenix was still breathing hard, muscles shaking, but when Ethan stopped pressuring him, the stallion didn't run. He stayed, watching. Ethan swallowed and exhaled. "My bad, buddy," he murmured. "Too much too fast." It took a long time for the tension in the stallion's body to ease. But eventually, he stepped forward, just an inch. Ethan didn't try again that day. Instead, he let Phoenix know he wasn't angry. That trust wasn't a demand, it was a choice. And Phoenix had to be the one to make it. The next morning, Ethan found himself leaning against the stall door, staring at the horse who had come into his life so unexpectedly. "You're one stubborn guy, huh?" he mused. Phoenix flicked his ears, eyeing him warily. "Yeah, I get it," Ethan sighed. "I'd be the same way if I was in your shoes." That afternoon, he didn't try to halter Phoenix, didn't try to lead him out. Instead, he sat on the ground inside the stall, cross-legged, hands resting loosely on his knees. He stayed there for hours, saying nothing. When he finally stood to leave, something remarkable happened. For the first time, Phoenix reached out. His scarred muzzle brushed against Ethan's sleeve, just for a second, before pulling back. It was the smallest gesture, but Ethan knew it meant everything. Could this fragile trust be the beginning of something more? Or will Phoenix's past continue to haunt him? Let us know what you think in the comments, and stay tuned for the next part of this journey. Chapter 3. Testing the Limits. Ethan had spent weeks laying the foundation of trust between himself and Phoenix. But he knew that trust alone wasn't enough. The stallion was healing, but the past had left scars deeper than the eye could see. To truly help him, Ethan needed to test his limits, to see if the fear that had ruled Phoenix's life for so long could be replaced with something else. That morning, he rose before the sun, slipping out into the cool air. The world was still, save for the distant sound of insects and the occasional rustling of leaves. He paused outside the barn, inhaling deeply. Today was a big day, not because he expected miracles, but because he needed to push Phoenix further than ever before. He entered the barn quietly, the scent of hay thick in the air. Phoenix stood in his stall, his head lifting slightly at Ethan's approach. There was no fear in his eyes this time, just awareness. A month ago, the stallion would have tensed at the mere sound of footsteps. Now, he simply watched. "Morning, buddy," Ethan murmured, leaning against the wooden stall door. Phoenix flicked an ear toward him but didn't move away. Ethan held up the halter, letting Phoenix see it first. The stallion's nostrils flared, his muscles tightening ever so slightly. Ethan didn't rush. Instead, he waited. Patience was key. After a moment, Phoenix took a slow step forward. "That's it." Ethan extended the halter again, keeping his movements measured. Phoenix hesitated. Then, for the first time, he dipped his head ever so slightly. Accepting the touch, Ethan swallowed, his heart pounding. Slowly, he slid the halter over Phoenix's head, buckling it in place. The stallion flinched but didn't fight. "Good boy," Ethan whispered. "Just breathe." Phoenix's nostrils flared, his breath coming quickly. Ethan exhaled loudly, exaggerating the sound, and a second later, Phoenix mirrored him. A tiny victory, but one that meant everything. With cautious steps, Ethan led Phoenix out of the barn. The sun was rising now, casting a golden glow over the pasture. Phoenix hesitated at the threshold, his hooves planted firmly on the ground. The wide open space was both inviting and terrifying. Ethan didn't pull, he just waited. Phoenix's dark eyes flicked toward the pasture, his ears twitching, his body was tense, every muscle coiled like a spring. But then, slowly, he stepped forward, one step, then another, and suddenly, he was outside. For a moment, he froze, the morning air crisp against his coat. His ears flicked back, uncertainty clouding his expression. Then, as if remembering who he was, he ran. Ethan watched, his breath caught in his throat. As Phoenix exploded forward into the field, his muscles rippled beneath his chestnut coat, his tail whipping behind him like fire. His movements were powerful, full of untamed energy, but also something else. Freedom. For the first time, Phoenix looked like he belonged in his own skin. Ethan leaned against the fence. Mesmerized, the stallion galloped wildly, his hooves kicking up dust as he moved. He wasn't running from something anymore. He was running because he could. Minutes passed, the world narrowing to just the sound of Phoenix's hooves against the earth. And then, finally, the stallion slowed. His breath came hard and fast, his chest rising and falling. He turned back toward Ethan, his dark eyes locked onto him. "That's it," Ethan whispered. "That's who you are." Phoenix took a step closer. Then another. Ethan stood still, his pulse racing. Phoenix stretched his muzzle forward and, just for a second, brushed it against Ethan's shoulder. It was the first time he had ever initiated contact. Ethan swallowed hard, resisting the urge to reach for him. He let Phoenix decide what happened next. The stallion stood there, his breathing evening out. Then, as if deciding he had had enough, he stepped back, but he didn't leave, not completely. Ethan's chest tightened. This was it, the turning point he had been waiting for. For the next few days, Ethan repeated the process. Each morning, he led Phoenix into the pasture, watching as the stallion grew more confident in the open space. At first, Phoenix still hesitated at the barn door, but every time, his hesitation grew shorter. By the end of the week, he didn't hesitate at all. But there was still one last challenge. The saddle. Ethan knew this was the moment that would define everything. A part of Phoenix's past trauma had been tied to being ridden. If he could help the stallion overcome that, then maybe, just maybe, Phoenix would be free. One evening, Ethan brought the saddle out. He set it down near Phoenix, not forcing anything, just letting him see it. Phoenix eyed it warily, his ears flicking back. "It's just a saddle," Ethan murmured. "Not a weapon, not anymore." Phoenix didn't move away. That was a good sign. Slowly, Ethan lifted the saddle. He let Phoenix sniff it, run his muzzle over the leather. Then, carefully, he draped it over the fence post beside them. Phoenix watched but didn't react. Good. The next day, Ethan tried again. This time, he brought the saddle closer. He let Phoenix sniff it once more before, ever so gently, resting it against his back. Phoenix froze. Ethan felt his breath catch. Every muscle in his body coiled in anticipation. If Phoenix panicked, if he bolted now, it could undo everything. Seconds passed. Then, Phoenix exhaled. Not a flinch, not a buck, just a breath. Ethan slowly stepped back, allowing Phoenix to stand there with the saddle resting on his back. "You're okay," he whispered. Phoenix stayed still. Ethan swallowed, a wave of relief washing over him. For the first time, it felt real. For the first time, it felt possible. Phoenix was fighting his past and winning. But Ethan knew there was still more ahead. Because what happened when he tried to ride? Would Phoenix trust him enough to take that step? Chapter 4. The weight of the past. Ethan had never been the kind of person to give up. He knew patience was his greatest weapon. But even patience had limits. Phoenix had come a long way, allowing the saddle, walking with Ethan, even responding to his voice with trust instead of fear. But one thing remained: riding. Ethan had been putting it off. Not because he doubted Phoenix's progress, but because he understood what it meant. The moment he got on Phoenix's back, the stallion would have to choose, to trust or to fear. Ethan didn't want to push him before he was ready. He had seen it before, how one wrong move, one careless demand, could undo everything. So he waited. Every morning, he led Phoenix to the pasture, walking beside him instead of riding. Some days, Phoenix seemed willing, his ears twitching forward, his body relaxed. Other days, he stiffened at the mere sight of the saddle. Ethan never forced it. He let Phoenix decide. And then, it happened. That morning, the sky stretched endless and blue above them, crisp air filling the lungs of every living thing. The leaves rustled with the whisper of the season's change. Ethan walked Phoenix to the center of the field. "All right, buddy," he murmured, his voice steady. "We've been waiting for this moment. Let's try it together." Phoenix watched him with cautious eyes. But he didn't pull away. Ethan lifted his foot into the stirrup, the weight of years of pain and healing pressing down on both of them. Then, he paused, gave Phoenix a chance to react, to run, if he needed to. But Phoenix didn't move. Ethan's heart pounded. With careful slowness, he swung his leg over and settled into the saddle. For a split second, Phoenix froze. Ethan felt it, the rigid tension in his muscles, the sharp intake of breath, the moment before a storm. He didn't pull the reins, didn't press forward. He just breathed. "Easy," he whispered. "I've got you." Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, Phoenix did something Ethan never expected. He exhaled. Not a panicked breath, not a desperate attempt to flee. A real, genuine exhale. Like he had been holding onto something heavy for far too long. And was finally letting it go. Ethan swallowed hard. "Good boy," he whispered. Gently, he pressed his heels into Phoenix's sides. The stallion took one step forward. Then another. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. They were moving. Phoenix wasn't running. He wasn't fighting. He was trusting. For the first time since Ethan had met him, Phoenix was allowing someone to carry the weight with him. The wind moved through the pasture, rustling the tall grass. The world felt still, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. And then, a sharp noise shattered the moment. A rustling from the trees. A sudden movement. Phoenix froze. Ethan's stomach dropped. He felt it before it happened, the coiling of muscles. The shift of weight. Phoenix reared. Ethan's hands flew to the reins. But he didn't yank. He knew that if he tried to force Phoenix back down, it would only make things worse. Phoenix's front hooves slashed through the air, his breath coming fast. Panicked, Ethan stayed calm. "Easy," he called, his voice steady. "I'm here." But Phoenix wasn't there anymore. He was somewhere else, back in the past, trapped in a moment of terror. Ethan tightened his grip. If Phoenix bolted, if he ran blindly, he could hurt himself. "Phoenix," Ethan called, his voice cutting through the panic like a blade. The stallion's ears twitched. Ethan took a deep breath, then did the only thing that made sense. He let go, not of the reins, of control. Instead of pulling Phoenix back, he matched his breathing to the stallion's, grounding him with his presence. Slowly, Phoenix's front hooves crashed back to the ground. His body shook, his flanks damp with sweat. But he didn't run. Ethan reached forward and rested a hand against Phoenix's trembling neck. "You're okay," he whispered. "We're okay." Phoenix stayed still. The fight was over. Ethan slid off the saddle. Landing softly beside him, he kept a hand on Phoenix's side, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. "That was scary, huh?" he murmured. Phoenix let out a long, shaky breath. Ethan pressed his forehead against the stallion's, his chest tight with emotion. "You're stronger than you think," he whispered. "You're not that broken horse anymore. You never were." Phoenix stood there, breathing, existing. For the first time, Ethan realized something. This wasn't just Phoenix's journey. It was his too. He had spent so much time saving Phoenix. But the truth was, Phoenix had been saving him right back. Ethan let out a breath, a soft laugh escaping his lips. "All right, buddy," he murmured. "You ready to try again?" Phoenix didn't move. Then, ever so slowly, he nudged Ethan's shoulder. Ethan's throat tightened. "Okay," he whispered. "Let's go." He climbed back into the saddle. More careful this time, more aware. Phoenix hesitated. Then, he moved forward. Not because he had to. Because he chose to. Ethan's heart soared. They had crossed a line today, a line that couldn't be undone. Phoenix had faced his fear and survived it. He had let go of his past, if only for a moment. Now, he just had to keep going. And this time, he wasn't alone. Chapter 5. The Race Toward Freedom. Ethan woke up before dawn. The cool morning air crisp with the scent of fresh grass and damp earth. Outside, the sky was painted in deep blues and purples, the last stars twinkling faintly before giving way to the sunrise. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes before stepping out onto the porch of the small stable house he had come to call home. In the distance, Phoenix stood in the pasture, gazing toward the horizon. His stance was no longer that of a broken horse. His head was held high. His coat gleamed under the soft morning light, and his eyes, once dull with fear, now burned with something new. Determination, strength. Ethan knew it was time. For weeks, they had been preparing for this moment. Phoenix had learned to trust again, to push past his fear. They had worked through his anxieties. And now there was only one challenge left, the racetrack. Not to race, not to compete, but to reclaim the very thing that had been taken from him, his freedom. Ethan loaded Phoenix into the trailer, securing him gently, whispering words of reassurance. Phoenix stood still, no longer trembling at the sight of the enclosed space. Instead, he watched Ethan, waiting, trusting. As they drove toward the private track just outside of town, Ethan's hands tightened around the steering wheel. He could feel the weight of this moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just about proving something to the world. It wasn't even about proving something to Phoenix. It was about letting go. When they arrived, Carter was already there, leaning against the fence with his arms crossed, watching as Ethan unloaded Phoenix. The older man had become a mentor of sorts, guiding Ethan through the process of not just training a horse, but understanding him. "You sure about this?" Carter asked, his sharp eyes scanning Ethan's expression. Ethan nodded, running a hand along Phoenix's neck. "Yeah, it's time." Carter let out a slow breath. "Then let's do it." Ethan led Phoenix toward the track, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the quiet morning air. The stadium was empty, just as planned. No roaring crowds, no loudspeakers blaring announcements, just them and the open track. Phoenix hesitated at the entrance. Ethan felt the tension ripple through the stallion's muscles. He placed a hand on Phoenix's side, grounding him. "We're not here to relive the past," Ethan murmured. "We're here to rewrite it." Phoenix let out a deep breath. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. Ethan climbed into the saddle, keeping his touch light, his movements careful. He could feel Phoenix's heartbeat, the nervous energy beneath his calm exterior. And then, with a gentle nudge, they moved. At first, it was slow, each step hesitant, as if Phoenix was still testing the waters. Ethan stayed quiet, letting him set the pace. Then, something shifted. Phoenix's ears flicked forward, his steps grew stronger. And then, he ran. Ethan barely had time to react before Phoenix surged forward, his hooves thundering against the dirt. Wind rushed past them, the world blurring into streaks of color. But this wasn't panic. This wasn't fear. This was freedom. Ethan felt his own heart pounding. But not from fear, from awe, from the sheer power beneath him. Phoenix wasn't running away. He was running toward something. Ethan let go of the reins slightly, giving Phoenix the space to decide his own speed. The stallion stretched forward, his muscles working effortlessly, his body built for this. He had been made to run. And now, he was doing it for himself. As they rounded the final bend, Ethan slowed him down, gently pulling him back to a trot. Then a walk. Phoenix's breath came in heavy bursts, his sides heaving. But when Ethan looked down, he saw it, pride in his eyes. "You did it," Ethan whispered, patting his neck. "You took it back." Phoenix let out a soft snort, his ears twitching toward Ethan's voice. Carter stood by the fence, watching with an unreadable expression. As Ethan dismounted and led Phoenix toward him, the older man nodded. "Never thought I'd see that horse run again," Carter admitted. "Not like that." Ethan smiled, scratching behind Phoenix's ears. "Neither did I." But he wasn't done fighting. Carter gave him a long look before speaking. "And what about you? You weren't just saving him, were you?" Ethan exhaled, letting the truth settle in his chest. He had come into this thinking he was rescuing Phoenix, that he was giving the stallion a second chance. But the truth was, Phoenix had given Ethan something just as important, a reason to believe again. Ethan glanced back at Phoenix, the stallion standing tall, his eyes focused on the open fields beyond the track. "What's next?" Carter asked. Ethan smiled. "I think he should decide that for himself." Over the next few weeks, the town started whispering about Phoenix, the once forgotten horse who had defied the odds. Ethan received calls from people wanting to meet him, see the stallion who had captured so many hearts. But Ethan knew this wasn't about fame or recognition. Phoenix didn't need a spotlight. He just needed a home. And Ethan had already made up his mind. One afternoon, as he walked Phoenix through the open pasture, he made a choice. Phoenix had spent too long confined, too long under someone else's control. Ethan unhooked the lead rope and stepped back. Phoenix hesitated, turning his head to look at Ethan. "You're free," Ethan whispered. For a moment, the stallion just stood there, as if he didn't believe it. And then, he ran, not out of fear, not because someone commanded him, but because he wanted to. Ethan stood there, watching as Phoenix galloped across the field, his movements effortless, his spirit fully restored. Carter walked up beside him, hands in his pockets. "You did good, kid." Ethan smiled, his heart feeling lighter than it had in years. "Nah," he said, watching Phoenix disappear over the hill. He did. The wind carried the sound of Phoenix's hooves, a steady rhythm of victory. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan knew this was exactly where he was meant to be. What did you think of Phoenix's journey? Do you believe in second chances? Let us know in the comments, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories. This final chapter brings emotional closure, showing that both Ethan and Phoenix have grown and healed together. It keeps the focus on their bond and ends with a powerful, uplifting moment. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments.